I commit myself to serve you all, King, country, and Commonwealth.
For a family built on control, this was the kind of silence that terrifies a palace. No warning, no careful leak to the press, no soft rollout through royal insiders. Just one cold line posted to the royal website. A formal announcement will be made at 7 p.m., and in that single moment, everything changed. Royal watchers froze, reporters scrambled. Phones lit up across newsrooms, private offices, and palace-adjacent circles. Nobody had answers. Nobody had context. And that was the first sign this was serious. The royal family does not do mystery unless it has to. Every movement is usually cushioned, previewed, measured. But this time, the machine broke pattern. And when a family like this breaks pattern, people assume one thing first: crisis. Theories spread fast. Health scare, sudden resignation, internal rupture, a forced step back, a power move. The more the palace said nothing, the louder the panic became. Even seasoned royal insiders, the people who usually know which curtain is about to move before anyone else sees it, were completely in the dark. No talking points. No background briefing. No friendly whisper to the right columnist. Just silence. And in royal life, silence is rarely empty. It usually means someone is preparing to change the story before anyone else can. Then another detail resurfaced, and suddenly felt important. William and Kate had missed a public event earlier that day. At first, it had passed almost unnoticed, but now people looked back at it differently. If this announcement belonged to the king or queen, then why was attention quietly drifting toward the Prince and Princess of Wales? Why did it feel less like a family message, and more like the beginning of a transfer? At exactly 6 p.m., the screen came to life. And it was not Charles, not Camilla, not a grand royal setting filled with official symbols and stiff ceremony. It was William and Kate, sitting side by side in what looked more like a working office than a throne room. No dramatic backdrop, no show of power. And somehow, that made it feel even more powerful. They were not dressed for spectacle. They were dressed for seriousness. And the country paid attention instantly. William spoke first. No long preamble, no ornamental royal phrasing, just a line that landed with force. The monarchy is not just a symbol. It is a responsibility. That was the moment people understood this was not a tribute and not a ceremonial update. It was a repositioning, a reset, a declaration that the next generation was no longer content to wait quietly for history to make room. Kate followed with the kind of calm that can be more disruptive than anger. "This is not about tradition," she said. "It is about trust." And with that, she gave the whole message its emotional center. Not rebellion, not disrespect, not a break from the institution. Something more dangerous than that. A claim to moral authority. William and Kate were not asking the public to admire the monarchy. They were asking the public to believe in them. That difference mattered. Because in a time when institutions survive or fall on trust, not titles, they had just redrawn the line between symbolism and relevance. There was no sign of Charles behind them, no sign of Camilla. They stood alone, but not exposed. They stood like people who had decided the future could no longer be managed through old rituals alone. It had to be earned. And then came the move that changed the entire meaning of the announcement. The Diana Initiative. That name alone shifted the room, not because it was nostalgic, but because it was strategic. Kate did not present it as a memorial or a graceful nod to the past. She presented it as unfinished work. Princess Diana had never disappeared from public feeling. Her image remained alive in memory, but her values had too often been reduced to flowers, documentaries, anniversaries, and grief. Kate took that emotional archive and turned it into a living instrument. The Diana Initiative was introduced as a global nonprofit rooted in the values that made Diana beloved in the first place: compassion, honesty, dignity, and the stubborn instinct to place people before image. But this was not just another royal charity wrapped in elegant language. This was infrastructure, a long-term plan, a real operational network. And from the beginning, Kate made it clear she would not simply lend her name to it and appear when cameras were convenient. No red carpets, no hollow gala circuit, no carefully polished moments designed to look compassionate from a safe distance. She would go where pain actually lives: women's shelters, underfunded communities, families living in instability, survivors who are usually spoken about instead of spoken with. The message was unmistakable. Diana's legacy would no longer be handled like fragile memory. It would be used. That is what made it hit so hard. Kate was not trying to imitate Diana. She was doing something more effective. She was taking the emotional legitimacy Diana still held with the public and placing it inside a structure with reach, stability, and institutional force. Diana had worked with courage from the edges. Kate was moving from the center, and that gave the whole thing a different kind of power. The response was immediate. Social media exploded. Commentators called Kate the people's queen long before any crown could ever touch her head. Support rolled in from across the world. To many, this did not feel like branding. It felt like direction. A future queen stepping forward not when duty required it, but when relevance demanded it. That distinction is exactly why the public connected so quickly. But outside the public mood, there was another reaction. Inside palace walls, the atmosphere was not celebratory. It was strained. The silence from the king and queen was almost louder than the announcement itself. No warm endorsement, no visible support, no joint statement praising the initiative. Nothing. And sometimes, what the palace refuses to say tells you more than any official line ever could. Charles, according to insiders, was caught off guard. Not furious at first, just stunned. He had spent his life preparing to embody the institution, only to watch attention swing away from the crown and toward his son and daughter-in-law in one clean motion. The public was not looking at the monarch. It was looking past him. And that is a hard thing for any reigning sovereign to feel, especially one who waited so long to arrive. Camilla felt it differently. For her, Diana's name was never neutral terrain. She had spent years slowly rebuilding a public image that had once been radioactive. Quietly, patiently, carefully. Then suddenly the most emotionally powerful figure in modern royal memory was back at the center of the story, carried not by critics or documentarians, but by Kate. Not as accusation, but as legitimacy. Kate did not need to attack anyone. The name itself reopened old weather inside the institution. And what made the situation worse was the way William and Kate had done it. They had not waited for the palace to absorb the idea and reshape it into something safer. They had not asked for permission and then negotiated the edges. They had already acted. Some inside the palace began whispering the same word. Calculated. Not reckless. Calculated. Because catching the institution off balance only works if you mean to do it. Camilla reportedly wanted the initiative brought under tighter royal management, softened, cleaned up, folded into the traditional system where everything can be supervised, translated, and controlled. But advisors understood the trap. Touch it too aggressively, and the palace would look jealous. Try to neutralize it, and the palace would look threatened by Diana's legacy and by Kate's popularity. So they did the only thing they could do without making the damage worse. They stayed quiet. But silence did not weaken the initiative. It strengthened it. Because William understood exactly what was happening. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a strategy. He was no longer trying to prove he could eventually lead. He was acting like someone who believed leadership begins before the title arrives. And in private, that created a real generational fracture. Charles still believed in the choreography of monarchy, the gradual process, the protocols, the hierarchy that protects continuity by slowing everything down. William was looking at the same institution and seeing fragility. To him, delay was not dignity. It was risk. If the monarchy wanted to survive, it could not keep performing stability while losing emotional credibility. That was the difference between father and son. Charles was still defending form. William was trying to reclaim function. The tension broke into public view when Camilla, asked about the Diana initiative at a charity event, gave a remark that felt sharper than intended. The monarchy has always served with dedication, and we do not need to invoke the past to prove it. That line traveled instantly. Many heard it as a direct shot at the initiative, and more specifically, at Kate's decision to bring Diana forward as a living moral reference point. Kate answered days later with the kind of restraint that lands harder than open confrontation. "This work is not about the past," she said. "It is about the future we build together." She did not name anyone. She did not escalate. But she made one thing clear. She was not stepping back. And now the story was no longer only about the initiative. It was about the divide it had exposed. If you're still with me, take a second and make sure you stay to the end, because what happened next turned this from a royal project into a fight over who really controls the future of the crown. Behind closed doors, the conflict deepened. At Clarence's house, Charles reportedly called a private meeting with William and senior aides, demanding to know why he had not been fully briefed. He saw it as a breach of protocol. William saw that language as proof of the problem. "This is not about protocol. It is about survival," he is said to have answered. And that line explains more than almost anything else. William was not trying to embarrass the palace. He was trying to outrun what he believed could make it irrelevant. The meeting ended without resolution. After that came the leaks. Charles's side painted William as impulsive, too eager, too willing to weaponize popularity. William's allies fed a different narrative to friendly reporters. That the king was trapped in an older royal mindset, unable to recognize how much had changed. At that point, it was no longer a family disagreement. It had become something larger, a struggle between two models of monarchy. One inherited, one emerging. And then Harry re-entered the emotional field. His public support for the Diana initiative should have been a unifying moment. He called it Mum's legacy in action, and with those few words, he gave the project another wave of emotional force. But privately, it reportedly infuriated William. The problem was not only what Harry said. It was that he said it publicly, without coordination, and attached himself to a project William and Kate had already positioned as theirs to carry forward. The brothers, according to insiders, had a tense phone call afterward. William felt blindsided. Harry refused to accept the idea that Diana's legacy needed palace permission to be spoken about. And suddenly, what should have been a shared point of memory became another front in a much older conflict. The public saw the symbolism immediately. Same mother, same loss, same legacy. Two completely different claims over what it means. Harry then added another layer in an American interview, saying Diana's work belongs to everyone, not just the palace. On the surface, it sounded generous and true. Underneath, it sounded like a challenge, a reminder that no one branch of the family gets exclusive moral ownership of Diana. That remark split opinion fast. Some praised Harry for speaking from the heart. Others felt he was turning a fragile moment into another chapter of an already bruised family drama. And that was the tragedy of it. The mission of the initiative, the actual work, began to lose space in the headlines. What had started as a major shift in royal purpose was now being filtered through feud, resentment, and unresolved grief. People close to both brothers tried to contain the damage, but the deeper truth was obvious. The fracture between William and Harry had not healed. It had only changed shape. That fracture matters because it did not begin with this initiative. It belongs to a longer story, one that Harry himself helped drag into the light. In his version, William was not just the responsible heir struggling with a difficult brother. He was also a man increasingly shaped by pressure, image, and control. The alleged physical fight between them, described in vivid detail, became a symbol not just of family anger, but of succession tension. Harry presented it as the moment private strain could no longer hide behind public poise. He also pushed a darker claim. That palace culture had slowly turned him and Meghan into liabilities, that stories were allowed to spread. That silence inside the family often functioned as consent. And in that telling, William and Kate did not need to attack directly. They only had to remain still while the pressure did its work. For Harry, that was the real wound. Not one argument, a pattern. Which brings us to Meghan. Because long before this initiative turned into a power struggle, many believe another quiet sorting process had already happened inside the royal family. One of the most discussed examples remains the bridesmaid dress incident before Harry and Meghan's wedding. On the surface, it looked trivial. A disagreement over fit, stress, emotion, timing. But in hindsight, people began to read it less as an isolated moment, and more as an origin point in a much bigger story. According to that interpretation, Kate did not need to launch a campaign against Meghan. She only needed to let a version of events settle in public consciousness, and then never disturb it. Meghan was painted as difficult. Kate was seen as composed. Meghan later insisted she had been the one left in tears, not the other way around. But by then the narrative had already hardened. And once royal narratives harden, they rarely reverse completely. What followed only fed the perception. Meghan's role appeared to narrow. She looked increasingly isolated. Staff relationships were described as formal, strained, careful. Meanwhile, Kate's image rose in direct proportion. Elegant, disciplined, unshaken by drama. For royal watchers who believe power inside the palace is often exercised through omission, not confrontation, it all looked familiar. Meghan did not have to be pushed in public. She only had to feel that staying would mean permanent distortion. Harry chose to leave with her, and from one angle that cleared the field. The outspoken couple were gone. The modernizing conflict did not disappear, but it was now concentrated elsewhere. William and Kate became the stable center, the acceptable future. The senior pair most people could project continuity onto. Whether that was deliberate design or institutional gravity, doing what it always does depends on who is telling the story. But the outcome is harder to dispute. Their position strengthened. At the same time, another tension line was hardening between Kate and Camilla. Camilla had waited years to reach the position she now held, and she had no desire to become ceremonial background just because public affection was shifting elsewhere. She had fought for her role, endured hostility, and survived scandal long enough to stand beside a king. She was not inclined to hand symbolic influence over to Kate, simply because the public found Kate easier to love. But that was the problem. Public affection matters. And Kate had it in a way Camilla never fully could. Even after years of rehabilitation, Camilla still carried history that could not be entirely rewritten. Diana's shadow remained attached to her story, whether fairly or unfairly. Kate, on the other hand, could invoke Diana without being trapped by the same baggage. She could appear as continuation rather than complication. That made her stronger in the one-currency monarchy now depends on as much as ceremony, emotional legitimacy. Insiders say Camilla understood exactly what William and Kate represented. Not just the next chapter, but a different model entirely. Leaner, more selective, more image-conscious, yes, but also more emotionally calibrated. If Charles had spent a lifetime preparing to inherit the monarchy, William and Kate were preparing to redesign it. And redesigns rarely leave every existing power center untouched. That is why the Diana Initiative mattered so much beyond the charitable work itself. It was not merely a project, it was proof of concept. Proof that William and Kate could move public feeling, redirect institutional energy, and define relevance on their own terms. Once that became visible, the old question changed. It was no longer when they would inherit influence. It was how much influence they already had. And maybe that is the deepest reason the announcement shook the palace so badly. It was not because William and Kate had broken from the monarchy. It was because they had shown they could become the monarchy's emotional center before the formal transfer of power ever arrived. In a royal family, that is not a small difference. That is the difference. Charles may still wear the crown, Camilla may still hold the title. But the future is rarely decided only by title. Sometimes it is decided by who can make the public feel that history has already started moving. William and Kate understood that. Harry understood it too, which is partly why his place in the story remains so painful. He knows the family from the inside, but he now speaks from the outside, and that gives him a strange power of his own, one that can support, complicate, or unsettle everything at once. So what looked at first like one surprise evening announcement was never really just an announcement. It was a test of authority, of timing, of emotional ownership, of whether the monarchy still belongs to protocol or whether it now belongs to whoever can persuade the public that they mean something in real life. William and Kate did not wait for that question to be answered for them. They answered it themselves. And if they keep moving this way, then the palace was right to be unsettled. Because this is no longer about standing in line. It is about quietly stepping to the front before anyone is ready to admit the line has already changed. If you enjoyed this story, stay with the channel for more deep royal narratives. And if this one made you rethink who really holds power inside the House of Windsor, let us know. Because in this family, the biggest shifts rarely begin with a crown. They begin with silence.